The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Chen stepped out of the visitor's vehicle. At 24, she appeared unremarkable among the sea of uniformed personnel bustling around the base. Her petite frame and quiet demeanor drew little attention from the Marines who passed by, most of whom towered over her by several inches. She clutched a small duffel bag containing her personal shooting equipment, items that had been her constant companions since childhood. Sarah wasn't military personnel. She was a civilian marksmanship instructor who had been invited to observe advanced sniper training exercises. Her credentials were impressive on paper, but in a world dominated by hardened military professionals, she often felt like an outsider looking in. The invitation had come through her mentor, Colonel Rodriguez, who believed that civilian expertise could offer valuable insights to military training programs. The base buzzed with activity as preparations were underway for the annual inter-unit marksmanship competition. Elite Marine snipers from various battalions had gathered to demonstrate their skills and compete for the coveted championship title. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the cream of the crop, men and women who had spent years perfecting their craft under the most demanding conditions imaginable. As Sarah made her way toward the designated observation area, she couldn't help but notice the confidence radiating from the competitors. They moved with the assured precision of individuals who had faced life-and-death situations where a single shot could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, their uniforms crisp, and their bearing unmistakably professional. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, the lead instructor, spotted Sarah approaching and walked over to greet her. His weathered face bore the marks of countless hours spent in harsh outdoor conditions, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat. He extended a calloused hand in welcome, though his expression remained somewhat skeptical about having a civilian observer at such an exclusive military event. The conversation between them was cordial but brief. Thompson explained the day's schedule, which included various shooting challenges designed to test different aspects of marksmanship skill. There would be long-range precision shots, rapid target acquisition exercises, and scenarios that simulated real combat conditions. The Marines had been preparing for months, and the competition was fierce. As they talked, other Marines began to take notice of Sarah's presence. Some glanced over with mild curiosity, while others seemed puzzled by the appearance of someone so obviously out of place in their highly specialized environment. Whispered conversations began to circulate about who she was and why she was there. The atmosphere, while not hostile, carried an undercurrent of professional skepticism that was typical when outsiders entered their domain. Sarah understood their reaction completely. She had encountered similar attitudes at other military facilities and shooting competitions. The world of professional marksmanship was traditionally male-dominated and deeply rooted in military culture. Civilian instructors, particularly young women, often had to prove themselves repeatedly before gaining acceptance from their military counterparts. Despite the underlying tension, Sarah remained focused on her primary purpose for being there. She was genuinely interested in observing the latest military training techniques and perhaps learning something new that she could incorporate into her own teaching methods. Her approach to marksmanship had always been analytical and methodical, emphasizing the mental aspects of shooting as much as the physical techniques. The morning progressed with various preliminary activities. Equipment was checked and rechecked, targets were positioned at predetermined distances, and safety protocols were reviewed. Sarah watched with professional interest as the Marines went through their preparations, noting the efficiency and attention to detail that characterized everything they did. What struck her most was the camaraderie among the competitors. Despite being rivals in the upcoming competition, they shared equipment, offered advice, and supported each other with the kind of brotherhood that only develops through shared hardship and mutual respect. It was a reminder that beyond the competition, these individuals worked together as a team with a common mission and shared values. The competition began with standard long-range precision shooting. Targets were positioned at distances ranging from 600 to 200 meters, challenging even the most experienced marksmen. Sarah positioned herself in the observation area, using high-powered spotting scopes to watch the action unfold. What she witnessed over the next several hours would challenge everything she thought she knew about military marksmanship training. The first shooter, Corporal Jenkins approached his firing position with textbook precision. He had been shooting competitively for over 8 years and held several battalion records. His rifle was a custom-built precision instrument worth more than most people's cars. He settled into position, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger with practiced ease. The shot rang out across the range, but when the target was checked, it was a complete miss. Initially, everyone assumed it was an equipment malfunction or an unusual wind condition. Jenkins adjusted his scope, checked his rifle, and prepared for his second attempt. The range fell silent as he lined up his shot once again. Another miss. The confusion on his face was evident even from Sarah's distant observation point. This wasn't supposed to happen to someone of his caliber. Sergeant Maria Vasquez took her turn next. She was known throughout the Corps for her exceptional shooting ability and had recently returned from a deployment where her marksmanship skills had saved countless lives. Her reputation preceded her, and many considered her the favorite to win the competition. She approached the firing line with quiet confidence, her movements economical and purposeful. Vasquez's first shot was met with anticipation, but like Jenkins before her, she missed the target entirely. The second shot was no better. A murmur of concern began to ripple through the assembled Marines. 2 of their best shooters had failed to hit targets that should have been routine for them. Something was clearly wrong, but no one could identify what it might be. The pattern continued throughout the morning. One after another, highly trained Marine snipers stepped up to the firing line only to watch their shots sail wide of the mark. These were individuals who could regularly hit targets at much greater distances under combat conditions, yet they were failing at what should have been elementary shooting exercises. Staff Sergeant Thompson called for a temporary halt to investigate possible causes. Equipment was thoroughly inspected, ammunition was examined, and weather conditions were reassessed. The range officers checked and double-checked all safety protocols and target placement. Everything appeared to be in perfect order, yet the mysterious string of misses continued. Sarah watched these proceedings with growing fascination. Her analytical mind began working through possible explanations for what she was witnessing. She had encountered similar situations in her civilian teaching experience, though never on this scale or with shooters of this caliber. There were certain psychological factors that could affect even the most experienced marksman under specific circumstances. During the investigation break, Sarah found herself drawn into conversations with some of the frustrated competitors. They spoke openly about their confusion and concern. These were individuals who prided themselves on their shooting ability, and the repeated failures were beginning to affect their confidence. Some began questioning their equipment, their technique, and even their fundamental understanding of marksmanship principles. Corporal Williams, a sniper with 3 combat deployments, approached Sarah during one of these informal discussions. He had heard that she was a civilian marksmanship instructor and was curious about her perspective on the morning's events. His frustration was evident as he described the feeling of his shots going exactly where he aimed, yet missing the target completely. As they talked, Sarah began to notice certain patterns in the descriptions she was hearing. The shooters were all describing similar sensations and experiences. Their sight pictures looked correct, their trigger control felt smooth, and their follow-through appeared textbook perfect. Yet the results were consistently poor across the board. The mystery deepened when the range officers announced that they had found no mechanical or environmental factors that could account for the poor performance. The rifles were functioning properly, the ammunition was within specifications, and weather conditions were actually ideal for precision shooting. The targets themselves had been verified to be positioned correctly and were clearly visible through the shooting scopes. As the morning wore on, the atmosphere among the Marines shifted from confidence to concern, and finally to something approaching disbelief. These were professionals who had built their careers and reputations on their ability to place shots exactly where they intended. The consistent failure was not just puzzling, it was beginning to undermine their sense of professional identity and competence. The afternoon session brought no improvement in the Marines' performance. If anything, the situation seemed to worsen as frustration mounted and confidence continued to erode. What had started as an isolated incident with 1 or 2 shooters had evolved into a complete breakdown of performance across the entire group of elite marksmen. Sarah continued her observations, but her role began to shift from passive observer to active analyst. She found herself studying not just the shooting techniques, but the overall behavior patterns of the frustrated Marines. Something about the entire situation reminded her of a phenomenon she had encountered in her civilian teaching experience, though she had never seen it manifest so dramatically or consistently. Colonel Rodriguez, who had originally invited Sarah to observe, arrived at the range during the afternoon session. He had been tied up in meetings all morning and was expecting to witness a demonstration of exemplary marksmanship skills. Instead, he found a group of demoralized Marines in a completely inexplicable situation that was beginning to reflect poorly on the unit's training program. After being briefed on the morning's events, Rodriguez approached Sarah for her professional opinion. As a civilian instructor with extensive experience working with shooters of various skill levels, he valued her perspective on training-related issues. He was particularly interested in whether she had ever encountered similar problems in her civilian programs. Sarah shared her observations about the patterns she had noticed, but she was careful not to jump to conclusions. The situation was unprecedented in her experience, both in terms of scale and the caliber of shooters involved. However, she did mention that certain psychological factors could sometimes create unexpected performance issues, even among highly skilled individuals. Their conversation was interrupted by Staff Sergeant Thompson, who announced that they were going to attempt a different approach. Instead of continuing with the long-range precision shooting, they would move to a closer range with larger targets. The hope was that this might help identify whether the problem was related to distance, target size, or some other factor they had overlooked. The new setup involved targets at 300 meters, significantly closer than the morning's exercises and well within the comfort zone of any trained Marine marksman. The targets were also larger and more clearly defined. If there was a technical issue causing the problems, this modified scenario should reveal it clearly. Unfortunately, the change in parameters did nothing to improve the situation. The first shooter at the reduced distance missed just as completely as he had at the longer range. The second shooter fared no better. The pattern of consistent failure continued unabated, and the Marines' frustration reached new levels. It was during this afternoon session that Sarah made a crucial observation. While watching through her spotting scope, she noticed that the shooters' fundamentals appeared to be technically sound. Their body positions were correct, their breathing was controlled, and their trigger manipulation looked smooth and consistent. Yet something subtle in their overall demeanor suggested they were fighting an internal battle that went beyond simple, mechanical execution. Sarah decided to request permission to examine the shooting positions and equipment more closely. Colonel Rodriguez granted her request, recognizing that fresh eyes might identify something that the Marines had missed in their own analysis. Sarah approached the firing line with the same methodical attention to detail that characterized all her professional work. What she discovered was both subtle and significant. The shooting positions, while technically correct, showed signs of overcompensation and excessive tension. The Marines were gripping their rifles more tightly than necessary, their breathing patterns were slightly irregular, and their trigger control, while still within acceptable parameters, lacked the smooth consistency that characterizes truly confident shooting. These observations led Sarah to a preliminary hypothesis about what might be causing the performance breakdown. She had seen similar patterns in civilian shooters who were dealing with specific types of psychological pressure or expectation-related stress. However, she was reluctant to voice her theory without more evidence, particularly given the military setting and the professional pride involved. The day continued with increasingly desperate attempts to solve the mystery. Different rifles were tried, ammunition lots were changed, and even the targets themselves were replaced. Nothing made any difference. The Marines continued to miss shots that should have been elementary for shooters of their training and experience level. As the afternoon drew to a close, the atmosphere on the range had become increasingly tense. What had begun as a routine training exercise and competition had evolved into a crisis of confidence that threatened to undermine the unit's morale and reputation. The Marines were beginning to question not only their equipment and training, but their fundamental abilities as marksmen. As evening approached, Staff Sergeant Thompson called for an end to the formal shooting exercises. The day had been a complete disaster from a performance standpoint, and continuing seemed pointless until they could identify and address whatever was causing the unprecedented failure rate. The Marines began the process of securing their equipment, their movements lacking the usual confidence and precision that typically characterize their actions. During the equipment breakdown, Sarah found herself in conversation with several of the frustrated shooters. They spoke openly about their confusion and growing self-doubt. These were individuals who had built their professional identities around their marksmanship skills, and the day's events had shaken their confidence to its core. Corporal Jenkins, the first shooter of the day, approached Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. He had heard that she was a civilian instructor and wondered if she had any insights into what might be causing their collective failure. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something approaching vulnerability, a stark contrast to the assured professional she had observed that morning. Sarah listened carefully to his description of how each shot had felt perfect in execution, yet had somehow missed the target completely. She asked detailed questions about his mental state during each shot, his pre-shot routine, and his perception of the shooting conditions. Her questions were probing but respectful, designed to gather information rather than assign blame or criticism. As more Marines joined the conversation, Sarah began to piece together a clearer picture of what might be happening. While each individual's experience was unique, there were common threads running through their descriptions that supported her growing hypothesis. About the root cause of their problems, the breakthrough moment came when Sergeant Vasquez mentioned something that seemed almost insignificant at first. She described feeling unusually self-conscious about her shooting technique, particularly given the presence of observers and the formal competition setting. This comment triggered similar admissions from other Marines who had been reluctant to voice their own concerns about being watched and evaluated. Sarah recognized this pattern immediately from her civilian teaching experience. She had encountered situations where highly skilled shooters experienced performance anxiety when placed in artificial pressure situations, even when those situations should have been well within their comfort zones. The presence of observers, the formal competition structure, and the unexpected initial failures had created a psychological environment that was interfering with their normally automatic shooting processes. However, Sarah was still hesitant to voice her theory publicly. These were elite military professionals, and suggesting that their problems were psychological rather than technical could be perceived as insulting or dismissive of their abilities. She needed to find a way to test her hypothesis without directly challenging their professional competence. Colonel Rodriguez, who had been observing these informal discussions, approached Sarah privately. He was experienced enough to recognize that she had developed some theory about the situation, and he was eager to hear her thoughts. The day's events had been professionally embarrassing for his unit, and he needed answers quickly to prevent further damage to morale and reputation. Sarah explained her observations about the patterns she had noticed in the Marines' behavior and described similar situations she had encountered in civilian settings. She emphasized that what she was describing was not a reflection of their shooting ability or training, but rather a common psychological phenomenon that could affect even the most skilled marksman under certain circumstances. Rodriguez listened intently to her explanation, asking detailed questions about the psychological factors involved and potential solutions. He was particularly interested in her suggestions for breaking the cycle of expectation and anxiety that seemed to be perpetuating the problem. As a career military officer, he understood that psychological factors could be just as significant as technical ones in determining performance outcomes. Their conversation was interrupted by Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had finished supervising the equipment securing process. He joined the discussion as Sarah was explaining her theory about performance anxiety and its potential impact on automatic motor skills. Thompson was initially skeptical, but he had to admit that no technical explanation had emerged despite thorough investigation. As the three military professionals discussed the situation, Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being asked for her recommendation on how to proceed. She suggested that the best way to test her theory would be to create a shooting scenario that removed the formal pressure and evaluation aspects that she believed were contributing to the problem. Her specific recommendation was to set up an informal shooting session the following morning, with no formal scoring or evaluation. The goal would be to allow the Marines to shoot in a relaxed environment where they could focus on their technique without the pressure of being formally assessed. If her theory was correct, their performance should improve dramatically in this less pressurized setting. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Corporal Williams, who had been listening to the discussion from a nearby position, approached the group with a suggestion that surprised everyone. He proposed that if Sarah's theory about psychological pressure was correct, perhaps she would be willing to demonstrate proper shooting technique under the same conditions that had been causing the Marines so much difficulty. The suggestion hung in the air for a moment as everyone processed its implications. Williams explained that if a civilian instructor could perform successfully under the same conditions that had been causing their problems, it would help confirm whether the issue was truly psychological rather than technical. More importantly, it might help restore their confidence by demonstrating that the shooting conditions themselves were not impossible. Sarah felt a mixture of apprehension and professional obligation. She had not come to the base expecting to shoot, and the prospect of performing in front of a group of elite military marksmen was daunting. However, she recognized that Williams' suggestion had merit, and she understood that her credibility as an instructor was now tied to her willingness to put her own skills on the line. Colonel Rodriguez and Staff Sergeant Thompson exchanged glances before Rodriguez spoke. He acknowledged that the suggestion was unorthodox, but pointed out that the day's events had already departed significantly from normal procedures. If Sarah was willing to participate, they could arrange for her to use military equipment and demonstrate her techniques under the same conditions that had proven so challenging for their Marines. After a moment of consideration, Sarah agreed to the demonstration. She requested permission to use her own rifle, which she had brought for educational purposes, explaining that familiarity with equipment was crucial for optimal performance. The Marines were curious about her civilian setup and gathered around as she unpacked her gear from the duffel bag she had carried. With her all day, Sarah's rifle was noticeably different from the military weapons the Marines had been using. While it was clearly a precision instrument, it lacked the tactical accessories and sophisticated optics that characterize the military equipment. Her setup was more minimalist, focusing on fundamental accuracy rather than combat versatility. As Sarah prepared for the demonstration, she explained her shooting philosophy to the assembled Marines. She emphasized the importance of mental preparation and consistency in pre-shot routines. Her approach was methodical and deliberate, focusing on the psychological aspects of marksmanship as much as the technical elements. The Marines watched with professional interest as Sarah set up her shooting position. Her movements were economical and precise, but there was a calmness about her preparation that contrasted sharply with the tension they had been experiencing throughout the day. She took time to establish her natural point of aim and spent several minutes simply breathing and focusing her attention. When Sarah finally settled into her shooting position, the range fell silent. The stakes of this demonstration were clear to everyone present. If she succeeded where they had failed, it would confirm her theory about psychological factors. If she failed, it would suggest that there might indeed be technical issues with the range or conditions that they had not yet identified. Sarah's first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The spotters immediately called out a hit and a cheer went up from the Marines. The shot had not only hit the target but had struck very close to the center, demonstrating the level of precision that the Marines had been trying to achieve all day. Her second shot was equally successful, followed by a third and fourth. Each shot demonstrated consistent accuracy and precision that stood in stark contrast to the morning's failures. The Marines watched in amazement as Sarah continued to place shot after shot exactly where she intended, using the same range conditions that had been causing them so much difficulty. As the demonstration continued, Sarah maintained a steady commentary about her mental approach to each shot. She described her thought processes, her breathing patterns, and her method for maintaining focus despite the pressure of performing in front of an audience. Her explanations provided valuable insights into the psychological aspects of marksmanship that were often overlooked in technical training. The demonstration reached its climax when Sarah completed a series of 20 consecutive hits on targets at varying distances. The Marines had witnessed a level of consistent performance that exceeded what any of them had achieved that day, accomplished by someone using unfamiliar equipment on a range that had been causing them unprecedented difficulties. The implications of Sarah's successful demonstration were immediately clear to everyone present. The range conditions, equipment, and targets were all functioning properly, The Marines' technical skills and training were not at fault. The problem had indeed been psychological, related to the pressure and expectations of the formal competition environment. The atmosphere on the range underwent a dramatic transformation following Sarah's demonstration. The frustration and confusion that had dominated the day were replaced by a mixture of relief, curiosity, and renewed confidence among the Marines. They finally had an explanation for their unprecedented performance problems, and more importantly, they had witnessed proof that the shooting conditions were not impossible. Staff Sergeant Thompson was the first to acknowledge the significance of what they had just witnessed. He approached Sarah with a combination of professional respect and genuine curiosity about her teaching methods. As a career military instructor, he understood the value of learning from any source that could improve his Marines' performance. Regardless of whether that source was military or civilian, Sarah used the opportunity to explain her approach to marksmanship instruction in greater detail. She emphasized that while technical skill was obviously crucial, the mental aspects of shooting were equally important, particularly under pressure situations. She described how psychological factors could interfere with normally automatic motor skills, causing even highly trained shooters to experience unexpected performance problems. The Marines gathered around to listen as Sarah outlined the principles she used in her civilian training programs. She explained how she worked with students to develop mental resilience and consistency that could withstand pressure situations. Her methods involved specific techniques for managing anxiety, maintaining focus, and executing shots with confidence even when being observed or evaluated. Corporal Jenkins, who had been the first to fail that morning, asked Sarah about the specific mental approach she had used during her demonstration. He was particularly interested in how she had managed to maintain her composure and confidence while performing in front of a group of military professionals who were expecting her to succeed where they had failed. Sarah explained that her success had actually benefited from the absence of the same psychological pressures that had been affecting the Marines. As an outside observer, she had not been personally invested in the competition or concerned about maintaining her reputation within the military community. This psychological distance had allowed her to approach each shot with the relaxed confidence that characterized her normal shooting process. However, she was careful to emphasize that this did not diminish the Marines' abilities or training. She pointed out that the psychological pressures they had been experiencing were completely understandable, given their professional investment in marksmanship excellence and the formal evaluation context of the competition. In many ways, their emotional investment in their performance had actually worked against them. Colonel Rodriguez, who had been observing the discussion with growing interest, asked Sarah about the practical applications of her insights for military training programs. He was particularly interested in whether her methods could be adapted to help Marines perform more consistently under the various pressure situations they encountered in their professional duties. Sarah explained that psychological training techniques were already being used successfully in many civilian competitive shooting programs. She described specific exercises and mental preparation methods that could be integrated into military training to help shooters maintain their performance levels even under significant pressure. The key was to practice shooting under controlled pressure situations so that the psychological skills became as automatic as the technical ones. The conversation was interrupted by Sergeant Vasquez, who made a suggestion that surprised everyone. She proposed that since Sarah had demonstrated superior performance under the challenging conditions, perhaps she would be willing to extend her visit and provide some formal instruction to the unit. The other Marines immediately voiced their support for this idea, recognizing an opportunity to learn from someone who had clearly mastered aspects of marksmanship that their traditional training had not fully addressed. Sarah was both flattered and concerned by the suggestion. While she was confident in her teaching abilities, working with military personnel would require adapting her civilian methods to a different culture and set of expectations. Military shooters had different objectives and constraints than civilian competitive shooters, and she would need to understand these differences to be effective. Colonel Rodriguez and Staff Sergeant Thompson conferred briefly before agreeing that extended instruction would be valuable for the unit. They proposed a 1-week intensive program that would combine Sarah's psychological training methods with the Marines' existing technical curriculum. The goal would be to develop a more comprehensive approach to marksmanship training that addressed both the physical and mental aspects of precision shooting. As plans for the extended training program took shape, Sarah found herself reflecting on the day's events. What had started as a simple observation visit had evolved into an opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to military training methods. She was excited about the challenge of adapting her civilian techniques to serve the unique needs of military marksmen. The Marines, meanwhile, were eager to begin working with Sarah's methods. The day's experience had taught them that even elite-level training could benefit from fresh perspectives and new approaches. They were particularly interested in developing the mental resilience that would allow them to maintain their performance standards regardless of external pressures or evaluation contexts. The week that followed transformed both Sarah's understanding of military training and the Marines' approach to marksmanship instruction. Each day brought new challenges and insights as civilian teaching methods merged with military precision and discipline. Sarah found herself adapting her techniques to accommodate the unique demands of military service while the Marines discovered new dimensions to their shooting skills. The training program Sarah developed combined traditional marksmanship fundamentals with psychological preparation techniques that she had refined over years of civilian instruction. She introduced exercises designed to simulate pressure situations, helping the Marines learn to maintain their performance levels even when being evaluated or when stakes were high. These exercises proved particularly valuable for preparing them for real-world situations, where accuracy could be a matter of life and death. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when Sarah introduced competitive shooting exercises that deliberately incorporated pressure elements rather than avoiding stressful situations. She taught the Marines to embrace them as opportunities to strengthen their mental resilience. They learned to use controlled breathing, visualization techniques, and pre-shot routines that remained consistent regardless of external circumstances. Staff Sergeant Thompson was particularly impressed by the measurable improvements in his Marines' performance consistency. Where previously they had shown excellent shooting ability under ideal conditions, but struggled when pressure increased, they now maintained steady performance levels across a wide range of scenarios. The psychological training had not replaced their technical skills but had enhanced their ability to access those skills reliably. The program's success became evident during the rescheduled marksmanship competition that took place at the end of the week. The same Marines who had struggled so dramatically during the original event now performed with the confidence and precision that characterized their reputations. More importantly, they maintained their composure and accuracy even when faced with the formal evaluation context that had previously caused such difficulties. Sarah's demonstration had evolved from a single impressive performance into a comprehensive teaching methodology that addressed gaps in traditional military training. Her success rate during that original demonstration had been remarkable, but the real victory was seeing the Marines achieve similar consistency through their own improved mental preparation and psychological resilience. Colonel Rodriguez documented the program's results and forwarded his recommendations to higher command levels. The integration of psychological training techniques into marksmanship instruction showed such promise that it was selected for broader implementation across multiple units. Sarah's civilian expertise had contributed to meaningful improvements in military training effectiveness. The Marines who participated in the program carried their enhanced skills forward into their regular duties and deployments. They reported improved confidence in their shooting abilities and better performance under the various pressure situations they encountered in their professional responsibilities. The psychological training had provided them with tools that extended beyond marksmanship into other areas of military performance. For Sarah, the experience represented a significant expansion of her professional horizons. She had demonstrated that civilian expertise could make valuable contributions to military training programs when properly adapted and implemented. The success of the program led to additional opportunities to work with military units and helped establish her reputation as an innovator in marksmanship instruction. The story of Sarah's unexpected demonstration and its aftermath became part of the unit's culture and training legacy. New Marines joining the unit learned about the importance of psychological preparation alongside technical skill development. The lesson that even elite-level performers could benefit from fresh perspectives and new approaches became an integral part of their training philosophy. Years later, many of the Marines who participated in Sarah's program would credit her instruction with significant improvements in their professional performance. They had learned that mastery involved not just technical proficiency, but also the mental discipline to access that proficiency consistently under any circumstances. Sarah's perfect shooting demonstration had been impressive, but her lasting contribution was teaching them to achieve similar reliability. In their own performance, the transformation from a day of unprecedented failure to a week of breakthrough learning illustrated the value of remaining open to new ideas and approaches. Sarah's willingness to step up when challenged, combined with the Marines' readiness to learn from an unexpected source, had created an educational experience that benefited everyone involved and ultimately improved the effectiveness of military training methods. The legacy of that remarkable demonstration continued to influence training approaches long after Sarah returned to her civilian career, proving that expertise and innovation could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances and sources.